Good evening, everybody. You're very, very welcome. We're delighted to have you here with us this evening to talk about the science of cosmetics, which is an event organised by Midlands Science and is sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry. This week is Science Week in Ireland, and Midlands Science run and organise the Midlands Science Festival each year. And this year they have 70 events running across the week, different in schools and public venues, and that's all about raising awareness around science and promoting science career options and helping, in particular, children in schools to have a greater understanding of science and with the aim of making society better for the future. My name is Craig Slattery. I'm a lecturer in UCD. I'm going to be talking, I'm a toxicologist, so I'm interested in the effects that chemicals can have on the human body, and I'm also a regulatory scientist, so I'm interested in how we decide what's safe and what sort of limits we put on things that are in consumer products. And if I was the only person here this evening, you'd guaranteed you'd be bored in about 10 minutes. So we're really, really lucky to have Dr Ann-Marie Creaven from the University of Limerick, the Department of Psychology, to flip to talk about a different aspect of cosmetics, the psychological aspect and the importance of cosmetics in maybe enhancing self-image, but also maybe some of the less desirable effects sometimes that cosmetics can have.
Yeah, some of the psychology of beauty and maybe what you can do if beauty isn't a strong point, besides cosmetics as well.
Exactly. So the plan for this evening really is I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes around the chemistry and the toxicology aspects, and then Anne-Marie is going to take over and talk about the psychology. And then we're going to transition into a little bit of a chat with all of you. And if you have any questions or any comments, we'd be delighted to hear them at any stage and to talk about them. And we'll try and answer the questions. We mightn't have all the answers, but that's science. Sometimes there aren't answers. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off. So we've called it Beauty and the Chemistry Beasts, the science of cosmetics, and we've put the chemistry beasts in inverted commas because part of the message I'm hoping that you'll take away this evening is that there's a little bit of misrepresentation sometimes. Chemistry and chemicals, there's a bit of an aura around that word, and sometimes you will have certain voices in the media or in public life in general making that word chemical synonymous with bad or evil or toxic. And that's a complete fabrication. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about as we go through. So first and foremost, the scientists, we love definitions. So what are we talking about here when we talk about cosmetics? There's the obvious stuff, the things that, foundations and things, the phrase cosmetic, we think about things to enhance appearance. And that's all of those things. So foundations and mascara and eyeshadow and things that will enhance and change the appearance of the face. But there's an awful lot more as well. So all of these products down towards the bottom, shampoos, things that are used for cleaning and cleansing the body and changing the scent of the body, they are also categorized as cosmetics from a legal point of view, from a regulatory point of view in Europe and around the world. So it's actually a really big group of things that we're talking about. And the statistics tell us that women on average use 12 to 15 of these products every day, and men use between 8 and 10. And there's a lot of focus sometimes put on medicines and the safety of medicines. These are far more widely used, and an awful lot more people are using these products than a lot of other things that we worry about. So it certainly requires a lot of care what ingredients go into these products. But the bottom line is we've been using these for a long, long time. So the whole idea of changing your appearance and enhancing your appearance, if you go back through every civilization that human beings have established, you find evidence of us playing around with our appearance and trying to make things look better and to improve the look of things. The ancient Egyptians, you go back there and we've seen the pictures, you've seen the movies. The pharaohs and the queens of Egypt, they had this very striking appearance and using eyeliner and using eyeshadows and pigments to change their appearance and present this kind of a flawless look. And that's something I'll repeat a lot. Flawless comes into the whole picture a lot, presenting that visage. For the Egyptians, it was religious. It was like an homage to the gods, saying, I'm presenting myself in my best form so that I'm worthy of meeting the gods. And down the bottom, we find these makeup kits in burial sites in ancient Egypt, buried with the mummies. In the funerary goods, you find makeup kits. So we've been doing this for a long, long time. And a lot of the trends that we follow nowadays, they haven't changed much over the centuries and the millennia. You go to ancient Greece, you go to ancient Rome, again, you'll find all of the things we're talking about here, different substances being used to change how people looked and presented themselves to the world. And it became associated with status and socioeconomic status and your place in the world. Very much so in the Elizabethan times and in Tudor times in England. Queen Elizabeth I was famous for her makeup and her makeup routine, and she was a trendsetter. So she established this kind of approach of using a very, very pale base layer, which it's not very realistic. It was white paint. It was almost like a clown's base layer. It was that white. And then really, really red contrasting lips. But no rouging on the cheeks, because that sort of an appearance was associated with, let's say, ladies of the night. So it was not something that somebody in high society wanted to be associated with. So it was a very cultivated look, and that became it came to be known as the mask of youth. So it was, and throughout her life, she continued this, and it was this flawless cake of white makeup on the face and these very red lips. And that became, for a long, long time, up to the beginning of the 1900s, the 20th century, that was the ideal for beauty. And you'll see, if you look at Impressionist paintings and Renaissance art, the same kind of pictures replicated, this white, pale visage. So, socioeconomic status, if you were out working in the fields, you had a hard life, the wind was chapping your skin, you had wrinkles, you were out in the sun, so you'd get a suntan. So it was the opposite of that. You had this white, pale complexion, this flawless complexion that communicated, I don't need to do that. I have means, I can sit in the house all day, I can play games, I can relax. I don't need to have a hard life. So we had that kind of idea of what beauty was that emerged over the centuries. The problem is how it was achieved. So this cake of white makeup, that base, it was basically a lead mixed with vinegar. And we now know that, of course, lead is neurotoxic. It's a really, and we do everything we can to limit and remove lead from the environment and from our own exposure, and we limit our own exposures to it. So lead was a fundamental part of early makeup for a long, long time. Arsenic, something that, again, it's a commonly used poison. It's something that people associate with murder mysteries. That's where the red lips came from. That wasn't a pigment. You didn't paint your lips red. What you did was you rubbed on the arsenic, and it made the blood vessels leaky. So it was actually subcutaneous bleeds in the lips caused by the arsenic that gave you the red appearance. And mercury as well, used on the lips to achieve it. And then if you look at the other aspect was the eyes. So you have this kind of doe-eyed look, so the dilated pupils, and that was achieved using belladonna, which is from deadly nightshade. And the name literally means belladonna, beautiful lady. So the name of this really toxic substance, which will cause heart attacks and paralysis, is actually derived from its cosmetic purposes. So then you jump to the 1920s and cinema started to become a thing, and television started to appear in the home, and it was another way for people to be influenced. So it was really in that era that it became more the era of trendsetters. So what movie stars started to do, and it would set a trend. And a lot of the large cosmetic companies who are still around today, they kind of started around this time, the 1920s. So Max Factor being recognized as one of the market leaders in establishing the whole way that cosmetics worked and trends. And that persisted for a long time. And there was very little attention paid to the ingredients that were being put in at that stage. And a lot of the things that I've just mentioned, lead and arsenic and mercury, they were in there in cosmetics for a long time. But certainly during the 20th century and in the middle of the 20th century, you might be familiar, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the thalidomide incident. So that was a game changer when it came to safety around pharmaceuticals. And as a society and governments around the world started thinking about how do we regulate products to make sure that people aren't being exposed to dangerous chemicals? And a similar incident happened with cosmetics. So talcum powder is classified as being a cosmetic. It's something that's applied to, change the scent, and it has absorbing qualities and things like that. So it's still classified as a cosmetic. So we had this incident in France where 36 children died because you had this talcum powder was contaminated with a chemical which it's an organochlorine. So it gets into the body and it has effects on the nervous system, and it will interfere with your breathing. So if you think about a child on a changing table, for example, you might be shaking the talcum powder on the nether regions, but you're creating this cloud that they're going to breathe in. So this was what was happening, and that made certainly Europe sit up and take notice. So it was a direct response to that. We had one of the first European Union pieces of legislation. So at that stage it was the EEC, it wasn't the European Union, but it went on to become the European Union. And we had the first piece of legislation starting to look at cosmetics and think about, well, what sort of things are in these products and how can we make sure that they're safe? Now, we won't talk about it just yet because I suspect it'll come up in the questions. We still do have issues around talcum powder. And there is a big issue at the moment with talcum powder and trying to make sure that it's safe. But we'll come to that. So if we look at cosmetics and the modern approach to cosmetics, it's very, very different. That should give you good confidence, hopefully. Things like lead, things like arsenic, they're not allowed to be put into cosmetic products anymore. So this is the official legal definition of cosmetics as it stands. So it's any substance or mixture intended to be placed in contact with the external parts of the human body or with the teeth or the mucous membranes in the oral cavity in the mouth with a view to cleaning, changing their appearance, perfuming, protecting, or correcting body odors. So there are very specific groups and categories for these products. And it's a big business. It's projected in the next few years it's going to hit $500 billion. That's the size of the market around the world. I've mentioned this already. Men and women use a lot of these products every day. What that means is, from a toxicology point of view, which is what I'm interested in, there's a large exposure possibility. If everybody on the planet is using these products multiple times per day, there's a large potential for harm if we get it wrong, if there are things in there that shouldn't be in there. So that's why there's such a high rate of scrutiny. You will find different numbers quoted, but the Environmental Working Group published an article a few years ago saying that on average they estimate that women are applying 168 different chemicals to their face every day, which is a lot. It's a big number. But the reason people react and kind of recoil is because there's this creeping association with the word chemical and bad, which is not true. So toxicology is sometimes called the science of poisons. I think that's a bit of misbranding because people tend to associate us with CSI and crime scene analysis and murder and stuff like that. Whereas in reality, what we're interested in toxicology is public safety. It's making sure that most people are not going to be exposed to dangerous chemicals significantly during their lifetime, and that consumer products, things that are produced by companies and put on the market for sale, are safe and don't have ingredients in it that are going to be problematic. So public safety is really what toxicology is all about, and particularly what we call regulatory toxicology, which is the space that I operate in. So let's talk about this thing, I suppose, the misappropriation of safe, natural, chemical, dangerous, because that's a very real thing, and it's almost instinctive sometimes. It's been so ingrained into the mind and the public consciousness. From a toxicology point of view, that's completely falsifiable, because as a toxicologist you have a really dim worldview. Our rule is everything can kill you. There's nothing on the planet that can't injure you if the dose is high enough. So we always go back to a guy called Paracelsus, and this was his contribution. All things are poison, nothing is without poison, only the dose makes something not a poison. So the idea being that for every chemical on the planet, there is a level which will be harmless, no effect. There will be a level that will be dangerous, and for some of them in the middle, there's a level that might be beneficial, and we tend to call those medicines. Okay? But the idea here is that there is no equivalence between chemical and toxic and natural being non-toxic. That's entirely manufactured. In fact, our sponsors this evening have had a long-running challenge where they challenge society and people in society who make this kind of a claim or draw this kind of comparison. If you can show us a cosmetic product that doesn't have a chemical in it, it's chemical free, we'll give you £1 million sterling. And that's been running since 2008. Nobody's claimed a prize yet. And that is because our world is made of chemicals. Everything is a chemical by definition. So if you take nothing away from here this evening, it's that association that has become very prevalent in the media and very prevalent in a lot of situations, that toxic and chemical go together and natural and safe go together. That's entirely incorrect. And just to demonstrate that point, anyone know what the most poisonous thing on the planet is? Most dangerous substance on the planet for a human being?
Water.
If you fall into it, yeah, and you can't swim, maybe. But in terms of ingesting it or getting it into your body, what do you think is the most dangerous thing? What's the most potent poison? So human beings, when we want to hurt other human beings, we're very good at coming up with ways of doing it. And the best human beings have come up with is something called VX nerve agent. So as the name suggests, it's a nerve agent that damages your nervous system and it stops it working. And it was used as a chemical weapon. So you need about 20 milligrams to kill an adult, which is a small enough amount. The best nature has done with hundreds of thousands of years of evolution is botulinum toxin. And if you look at the number of zeros smaller, you need microscopic amounts of that agent to cause death in a human being. To give you some frame of reference, if you had a grain of sand-sized piece of botulinum toxin, that's enough to kill 7,000 people. Okay? It's naturally occurring. It's produced by a living organism, and it's the most dangerous thing on the planet. And yet, people inject it in, or get it injected into their faces for various purposes. And that's the power of toxicology, because if we understand when the most toxic thing is dangerous, we can do something about that to limit the toxic effects. And it can have a really important use because not only is it used for cosmetic purposes, there are also medicinal purposes in chronic pain and things like that. So the bottom line is that the modern way that we regulate cosmetics and we make sure that they're safe, there's a lot of scrutiny involved. Modern cosmetics manufacturers and personal care product manufacturers, they have to have a really good handle on the ingredients that are in there, quality control, making sure that they're pure and they're not contaminated with other things. They have to do lots of safety assessments. They have to do testing to make sure that it's not going to cause skin reactions or it's not going to be potentially carcinogenic, cancer-causing. So there's a lot of toxicology assessment goes on when you have a new cosmetic. You have to look at every individual ingredient, every chemical that's in there, and you have to compare it against what's out there currently and what our understanding is. There are lots of requirements for labeling. If you actually look at a cosmetic, there's great invention. You'll see an awful lot of information. You see sometimes these accordion things stuck to the bottom of the tubes because cosmetics are designed to go in a purse or they're generally quite small. But all of that information by law has to be there. And there are very inventive ways of getting all that information into small packages. The claims and the advertising are regulated and there are strict rules about what you can say. You can't imply that there's a medicinal effect, for example, or that you're going to cure something, because by their definition, cosmetics are not drugs, they're not medicines, and they shouldn't have a medicinal effect. Otherwise, they're not a cosmetic, they're a drug. And then another big aspect is traceability and market surveillance. So, companies nowadays, they can't just put a product on the market and say, off with you. They have to track the market and they have to look out for signs that maybe there's a problem with their product. And if they identify a problem, they have to withdraw the product and they have to make sure that they make right whatever has happened. Now, science and knowledge is constantly moving forward. And every so often, new chemicals of concern will be identified and we might have to change products. And maybe previously we thought something was okay to have, and then somebody looks at it in more detail and realizes that's a potentially toxic chemical. let's remove that from a product. And there are lots of examples, things like parabens and phthalates and triclosan and even lead. You know, you will still find products. Lead is naturally occurring in the environment, so it's actually really hard to keep lead out of everything. But what you can do is control it to a really low level such that it's not going to have an effect. But a real success story in cosmetics over the last 10 years is in 2013, the European Union decided, okay, when we're testing drugs and when we're testing other products, there's a heavy reliance on animal testing. And in some cases, you can justify that to a degree. Now, part of the research I'm involved with is called 3 Rs, which is about replacing animal testing over time. But we have to do it in a strategic way. Because if we said in the morning, let's stop all animal testing, we wouldn't really be able to develop new drugs, and that wouldn't be great. But cosmetics was an area that was identified as it was possible. So in 2013, the European Union introduced a ban so that you could no longer put for sale new cosmetics that had been tested in animals after that point in time. So we're coming up to the 10-year anniversary, basically, to the ban on animal testing for cosmetics in Europe. And that had the effect, in a way, of almost a global ban, because Europe is a big market. So if you wanted to sell something in Europe, you had to say, well, we're not going to test in animals, we're going to test it in other ways, and we'll be more strategic in the sort of tests that we do. So that's one of the real success stories coming out of cosmetics. And in a way, it's a roadmap for the future of regulatory science, because ideally, and over time, we want to phase out animal testing everywhere. We don't want to have to rely on testing in rats and mice and rabbits to make sure things are safe for us. There are ethical problems with it, and there are also scientific problems. You know, they're not little human beings. There are differences there. So that's pretty much from me, all I want to say for now. So I'm going to hand over to Anne-Marie to talk about something completely different.
Thanks, Craig. I'll grab this from you. Thank you so much for that.
Get your slides.
I'm very self-conscious now about chemicals and what I've used today and what I haven't. But thank you, Craig, for the introduction. So my name's Ann-Marie Creaven. I'm a lecturer in psychology at UL, where I get to teach across a lot of different topics, including some introductory psychology, where we talk a bit about the social psychology of attractiveness, for example. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what we share with our students, and some of it will relate to beauty and some might move a little bit past that. So I guess to get started, I'll talk about this idea of beauty. What is it in psychology? So in psychology, we don't often use the word beauty. We talk about physical attractiveness, okay, or facial appearance, but we don't actually use the word beauty. Lots of things can be beautiful. You know, a scene can be beautiful, but we talk more specifically about physical attractiveness. And what's interesting is this idea of whether beauty is really in the eye of the beholder. Okay, is what I think attractive, what you think attractive, or are these things different? And across a lot of different studies in psychology, it looks like we're fairly consistent about what we think is attractive and what we rate as beautiful in a person. And there's an idea that what we do feel is attractive or beautiful stems from many, many centuries ago, where we were really focused on the survival of the species and the evolutionary value of a particular look, all right? So the characteristics people tend to think are beautiful are often ones associated with reproduction. So if you look young, that's attractive. If you have a particular facial structure that indicates the ideal hormonal balance for reproduction, that's attractive. A particular waist-hip ratio is attractive. A man who's quite muscular or strong or able to protect the species is attractive. And what's interesting is the research seems to be quite consistent that these are the characteristics people find attractive. However, a lot of that has been based on studies where you show people pictures, all right? So you show people pictures and say how attractive you think that person is. Doesn't necessarily mean that's how life will pan out in terms of who you might end up marrying or reproducing with, okay? But certainly there's quite a strong line of evidence suggesting certain traits are attractive because they're associated with your ability to reproduce. Now you might ask, well, what has makeup got to do with it then? And actually people use makeup, of course, as we do, to make ourselves look more attractive. And what's very interesting about makeup is the research is a lot more recent, because even though we have this lovely historical view that Craig gave us, we didn't use makeup so commonly, I suppose, across the board as we do now. We have more opportunities to study it. And what we find from the research on cosmetic use is that people are perceived, typically women are perceived as more attractive if they wear makeup. Waitresses wearing makeup are more likely to get higher tips, all right? People who don't. People are rated as more attractive if they wear makeup. And I suppose I find that very interesting because we know the person's wearing makeup. We know it's designed to make someone look attractive, but it works, okay? So that's why we stick to it. Now, what is also interesting about women wearing makeup in particular is some studies have found that men take women wearing makeup as a cue to their intentions. So they think, okay, they're interested in forming a relationship or a partnership, or they're open to men approaching them. And it turns out, unfortunately, that cue is not correct, okay? Women wear makeup all the time. It is not intended for men a lot of the time, but that is how men tend to interpret it. So for example, men will tip a waitress wearing makeup. Women, there'll be no difference, okay? So I find that very interesting, that women like to wear makeup, maybe for other reasons too. Okay, so now that we've established, I suppose, that there's a particular kind of look people go for, and that women wear makeup and men, I know for media purposes might, but we don't see that, okay? It doesn't tend to emphasize characteristics that are relevant. Let's take a little look at these most beautiful women and these most beautiful, hottest men, all right? So you can see that there's quite a lot of media focus on who's attractive and who's not, all right? So we have Marilyn Monroe, for example, is trotted out quite routinely, and she has these red lips that Craig referenced. And when it comes to men then, notice for women they zoom in on the face, but for men we have a bigger picture here. So we have a range of actors, including Idris Elba. I'm not so sure about Ryan Gosling, to be honest. Does he really belong? But he's there in the list. So you can see, we see all these top 50 lists, the most beautiful people in the world, and they're all celebrities, all right? Nobody finds a random person on the street and says they're the most beautiful. And if they're women, they're always wearing makeup, all right? They're always using this to enhance attractiveness. So these are examples, I suppose, of what people consider a beauty from a psychological perspective. Now, one interesting finding that is really consistent, so I'm focusing on the more consistent evidence in this area, is this idea of a halo effect. Has anyone heard of a halo effect before? No? Might be news. You might take it away with you today. This idea of a halo effect refers to the fact that while we shouldn't, I suppose, judge a book by its cover, we do when it comes to beauty. We do judge people by their appearance. And that halo effect is the idea that if you are beautiful or you present yourself as beautiful, we also think you're nicer, you're kinder, you're smarter, you're more competent, you're more successful. We think you are all these other things. And this is quite a consistent effect. When we meet someone we think is pretty, we think they're all these other good things too. All right, and I find that fascinating, how consistent that effect is. And what actually can happen sometimes is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, you know, imagine you're one of these most beautiful women or most beautiful men. People are nicer to you because, you know, you're pretty, right? They're nicer to you. They're nicer to you, and you go through the world thinking everyone is just so pleasant. And you become actually a little bit kinder. And people are more likely to offer you a job. And you do all right, and people understand if you don't do well because you're beautiful. And it goes on, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So over time, actually, you do become more successful and competent because of this level of attractiveness. So that is quite a consistent finding, and although the effects might be small, over time they accumulate. So you get your foot in the door in one job, you do all right, pat on the back, up to the next, okay? So beautiful people have an advantage. And that's why most politicians outside of Ireland, I can't buy into it in Ireland, it's too complicated to get into that, but people like Justin Trudeau, a very handsome man, all right? People select politicians, they are more likely to vote for people who are attractive. Political parties are savvy about this, okay? And they can use it to their advantage. Why not go with the easy win? And the easy win is the more beautiful person. So if you like, you could use makeup to enhance your looks. And live that halo effect and reap all those other benefits that people have experienced. Okay, so what else might be important? You're probably thinking, Anne-Marie, look, you know, I'm beyond this. I'm not so shallow. Beauty is not important to me. It is important. You mightn't acknowledge it, but it is. But on a more positive note and a less shallow note, when it comes to forming friendships and relationships, looks aren't just something we're interested in. One thing we're interested in, believe it or not, is how familiar people are to us, okay? So the more we meet somebody, the more we tend to like them, as long as they're moderately attractive at least, okay? And why does that work? Why is familiarity so important? That's another really consistent finding in psychology, that the more you meet someone, the more you tend to like them, unless you have a bad experience to start. Well, there's a few explanations for why familiarity is important. So one comes from a learning perspective. It's that when you meet somebody and you have a mildly positive experience, you learn that when you meet them, you have a mildly positive experience and you'll tend to like them. So you meet them again and again, and it's okay and it's positive, and you start to like them, and maybe a friendship will form, or maybe a relationship. So that's one perspective on why, as well as the attractiveness, familiarity is actually important. And another perspective goes back to that idea of a fight for survival and reproduction being important. And that's the idea that what's familiar is safe to us, all right? So if I meet somebody I know, I don't need to worry about anything, but if I meet someone I don't know, I might be uncertain about them. They could be a threat, all right? So familiar is nice. You know, it's nice to see a familiar face. Even if you think about going to the gym and the same person's on the desk, that's kind of nice, right? Doesn't matter how attractive they are, it's nice to see. And then another perspective on why familiarity is important comes from cognitive psychologists. So those are psychologists focused on thinking, attention, and memory and cognitive processes. And they suggest that when you see someone who's familiar to you, a nice familiar face, it's easier to process that. You don't have to make sense of it because it's not the first time you've seen it. And because it's easier to process, it's nicer, it's more positive. We all like things to be easy, so we like familiar faces. So as well as a beautiful face, we do like familiar faces as well. So that can be positive. So if you wanted, for example, to create an opportunity to meet someone, what you need to do is meet them many times in a mildly positive way. And over time, that should lead to some more positive interactions. Okay. Now, in terms of some other tips, I want to tell you about this study, a classic in psychology from the 70s. The Capilano Bridge experiment was a really, really ingenious way of thinking about attraction. So what the experimenters did was, in this park, there are two bridges. One is quite scary, Indiana Jones style bridge, all right? One of these rope bridges, you're a little bit anxious on it, you're a bit worried. And another is really, really solid. So what the researchers did was, they accosted men walking on the bridge. They had a female researcher. She had a sort of made up study for them to do. And then she said, if you've any questions, here's my number, okay? So we have two bridges, a really scary, rocky Indiana Jones style and a really solid one. More people on one of the bridges tended to call. Can you guess what bridge that was? Any ideas?
Scary one.
Scary one. How did you know?
Instinct.
Instinct. Yeah, your instinct was a scary one, but you were right. So the researchers concluded from this that when people were on the kind of scary bridge, their physiological arousal levels were high. They meet someone, and then they actually mislabeled their feelings. They thought, oh, I have this rush because I've met this person on the bridge. I'm definitely going to give her a call, all right? And that finding has been replicated in some other situations as well, where people might be in a heightened state of arousal because of fear, because of anticipation. They meet somebody, they can't quite work out why they're feeling what they're feeling, but this person's here, and they think this is the person that I'll make an approach to. So if beauty's not on your side, maybe a scary movie or a roller coaster is where you should go on a date, based on that study. Now, I want to talk about another aspect of all of this, because there's been a lot of discourse about cosmetics and about beauty and about social media as well, and how influencers can shape, how we buy into different kinds of products. I know during COVID, for example, people often didn't bother quite so much with cosmetics because you didn't have to. they didn't even bother with well-fitting clothes as much. So now we're seeing more people return their clothes because they're more fit conscious, because they actually have to get out and about. But now as we come through that and people are picking up the cosmetics again and those 168 chemicals a day, it's probably a good idea to think about what that means. So this idea of a body positivity movement is a focus on celebrating all body types and all kinds of looks, all right? And we see that sometimes in ads that choose people who are not stereotypically beautiful or who choose a range of body types. Now what's interesting, and you see this happen again and again, something arises, a movement arises out of a demand or to meet a need. And then there's a backlash against that movement, and that's what we're seeing now. So initially this body positivity movement was hailed as a great example of sort of reclaiming what it means to be beautiful, what it means to be attractive. But now people are suggesting, actually, hang on, the body positivity movement is not that body positive. It does not show the range, really, of body types there can be. It doesn't often include people with disabilities, for example. And even when you're being really positive about your looks, you're still being positive about a very shallow characteristic, right? You're still focused on your looks. So that movement is still emphasizing people's appearance over other qualities. So we see some people like Lizzo here, who's quite famous for championing, you know, she has a larger body size and she really flaunts it and shows it off in a way you'd never have seen 10 years ago. People like her are saying, actually, this body positive movement doesn't reflect everybody and still focuses to quite a degree on how people look and how attractive they are. So it's interesting because we see some positive aspects, it's great, but also we're still talking about how we look. Maybe we should talk about something else. So if we were to summarize this science and how you might use it to your advantage. So we could use the cosmetics, we can use the makeup, we can make ourselves look more attractive. There's so many YouTube tutorials, there's TikToks, there's people on, like YouTube didn't exist when I started college. You had to go to Brown Thomas for someone to do your makeup, and now you can become an expert quite easily online. I think certainly the baseline level of what's beautiful has really increased. So we see students and we see young people who really need to feel like they need to leave the house with a particular makeup style because they'll be photographed or they'll photograph each other. Whereas I was quite lucky, I suppose, to grow up ahead of that time where we didn't take these kind of photographs and it didn't matter and nobody knew how to do the makeup like that anyway, so you couldn't, right? But all of that has changed. And my feeling is that a really big cost of that change is actually time, mostly women's time. Women spend an awful lot of time meeting a very basic level of physical appearance now that we never had to do. So I think that is something that often goes overlooked. The time taken to achieve these standards is definitely much more significant for women than for men. Even though some men, of course, engage in different grooming practices as well, it doesn't seem to be to the same degree. So you could use makeup, all right, but some other tips, some other ways of using science to your advantage here if you wanted to be more attractive or indeed derive the benefits of being attractive. So one tip relies on this idea of a halo effect. So we know that people who are more attractive have all these advantages. They are perceived as even more intelligent, which doesn't make any sense unless, there's no reason for this, but they can be perceived as more intelligent unless they have a particular, very obvious kind of look. But if we know that this is the case, then why not use it to your advantage? Act like you are the most attractive person in the room. Maybe these benefits will follow, okay? If you go through the world thinking, this is how people will respond to me, it can become, to some extent, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's one tip. The next might be to find a bridge, okay? And if you can't find the exact kind of Capilano bridge, you'll have to go to Canada for that, I suppose. If you can't find those kinds of bridges across the Atlantic Ocean, the US and Canada, think of something else. So I'm from Salt Hill originally. Maybe a roller coaster there would be perfect. Certainly any kind of scary movie. These are ideal opportunities. Anything that raises adrenaline, that is something that people often attribute attractiveness to if they're in that situation with you. And then I suppose you can also use makeup. But I would say I'd have a big maybe about that. Because makeup is fantastic for making you appear more physically attractive. That's why people do it, and it does work. But it takes time. It takes money. And you don't look like the person you are, all right? So I think makeup can be fantastic, and it can also be used as an expression of who you are, of course. It can also be something that you like to demonstrate your creativity with. But I would be worried about the extent to which people might rely on it to meet a particular standard of appearance that they don't really necessarily need to meet. I suppose at the end, beauty is only skin deep. So while we're talking about beauty tonight, it's nice to also think about characteristics beyond that, and maybe to use makeup for fun, as we like, every day, but also to be, I'd love if everyone was okay without it as well, okay? So I think that's all from me. So I'll hand over to Craig to chair maybe a little discussion between us. Yeah. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. So you threw out lots of really interesting ideas. So the idea now is we'll go to a more open kind of a chat with you guys. So put your hand up if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And I'm going to throw in a few questions, not just Anne-Marie, in general. If you have a comment on anything that I'm throwing in there, feel free to jump in as well.
I have a question for Craig if no one has one, so we'll go
to... Right. Well, do you want to go first?
Well, yeah, men, right? What is this?
Men, question mark. What's the story?
What is the story? Because like women are spending enough. We're spending a lot of time doing this makeup stuff, right? Men don't have to, but is the beauty bit a women's issue with the chemical? And even women are working in the industry. Like if you go to get anything done, it's a woman doing it, doing your nails in an environment with all the lovely chemicals. Why is it a women's issue?
Well, it seems to be. The data would say it is. So, you know, it's far more prevalent. Now, maybe that is down to gender differences in attention to detail, in motivation to, you know, put in the efforts.
Yeah.
You know, men have a very big too hard box. There's a lot of things that go in that box when we're time poor.
But that's very convenient, isn't it? That the box is so big. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Women don't have time for this either.
Blame society.
Yes, I do blame. I don't blame you. I blame society. Yeah.
No, but it is true, and it is, and you see it in the marketing, you see it in everything. You know, and even the pictures of the celebrities. It was very much here was where we were focused, whereas with men it was much more about the whole package and a, let's say, a lower resolution, more zoomed out picture was enough. So a much higher level of scrutiny for, you know, female celebrities as well. I was going to ask you about the halo effect, because as you were speaking, I was imagining Justin Trudeau and, you know, Nicolas Sarkozy and all these people who would meet the classical definitions of attractive politicians, and then a few other ones popped into my head that maybe kind of break that mold. So what I was wondering there is it, can you invert the whole thing? If you become successful financially, or however you define success, does that make you more attractive?
Well, it would make men more attractive, yeah, because if you go back to that evolutionary perspective and survival of the species being important, a man who's more financially successful is better able to ensure the survival of the offspring. So certainly a man who is, you know, has a higher socioeconomic status or a better job will find himself being perceived as being more attractive, absolutely. The same doesn't really go for women. Okay. It doesn't, no, it's not as valued. Now that might change over time as we see more, you know, more of a cultural shift to women in the workforce. But it doesn't seem to apply now. But certainly those kind of factors do make a man more attractive and can compensate maybe for other factors that he might be lacking. You notice a man isn't putting on makeup to make himself more attractive, but maybe he might boast about a job or a sporting achievement or something like that. Okay,
different types of makeup.
Okay, maybe sunscreen. Sunscreen would be good, a cosmetic.
Great. Anybody want to jump in? A question or a comment or disagree with something we've said? That's allowed as well.
Miss no makeup came first or second in England, in Miss England or something like that during the summer.
Oh, that's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even sometimes...
She was very pretty.
Yeah. So she didn't need it. Yeah. Sometimes those kind of events are, I'd love to see, is that going to be consistent? Because they can often be a blip, right? Somebody without makeup. And then there's lots of attention on the event now, right? Everyone is saying, oh, look at this. Isn't that fantastic? Kind of like the body positivity movement. And if it continued over time, that would be amazing, that people could present as they were. But I suspect it probably won't. And even though she had no makeup, we already said it. She was very pretty anyway. We're still zooming in. We're still talking about the looks, even in the absence of her trying to do anything to highlight them. We're still talking about it. I think it's really interesting. There was an Irish actress who often had her looks commented on, and she said she doesn't want commentary on them at all. She doesn't want to be complimented on it. She doesn't want them to be insulted, because any kind of comment is still a judgment on you. You know, it's kind of like if you're praising a child for something, you might think, I'm doing a great job by praising them and telling them how good they are. I'm still judging them. So it's lovely to give them a bit of praise, but constantly judging them, even in a positive way, mightn't be the best thing. So I think that's a really lovely to hear that somebody won, but I'd love to see if that's a trend. My money's on no. We'll see. We'll come back next year and see. Yeah.
That kind of that's the other question I wanted to ask you, you know, that whole idea of trends. And so when you put up this thing of, you know, 50 most beautiful female celebrities and most beautiful or most attractive male celebrities, whatever language you want to use, chicken and egg.
Yes. Yeah.
Are those characteristics desirable because the famous people have them, or do they make people famous because they can channel those attributes?
Well, there's probably a halo effect of being famous too, right? So if you are famous, people will think you're other things. You must be attractive, right? As well, you must have gotten here somewhere. So the halo effects are not just for physical attractiveness. That's the main area we talk about them, but they can apply to any positive attribute. And celebrity is one. Being famous and being successful is one. So certainly people nominating others, and then you go, all right, fine, you know, top 50, I'm not going to bother disagreeing with that. But I do think that broader question of trends is really interesting, because we do see slight trends in what people deem as attractive. So we do see consistency in those factors I mentioned. We also see some trends, even in terms of the clothes people wear to show particular looks. We always see trends in clothing. And I can even see it being on a university campus. I see the trends change, and seeing it makes you feel very old to see it, but it's also so interesting. So even one year, for example, I was teaching a large class of 300, and I didn't notice anything particular about them. The next year I walked in, and all of these thick-rimmed glasses were staring back at me. And I thought, what has happened in a year? Nobody would wear glasses last year, and now they're all very obviously wearing them. They're committing. All I can see are glasses. So there are certainly trends in what people think are attractive. It happens quite slowly over time. Coming out of COVID is quite interesting, because it was very hard to get a sense of trends. And I know the students, for example, are talking about everyone having made a big effort and now actually pulling back a bit. They're calling it a glow down. New word to me, a glow down. So everyone is paring it back now. They've kind of settled into a norm. The celebrations and the big makeup and everything is pared back just a little bit.
So the peacocking is over with.
The peacocking is over for now. It'll take up again in the new year, I suspect.
In springtime, traditionally.
In springtime, yeah. But, you know, people are busy coming into Christmas, so we'll just
it's
see a
cold.
couple of days, and the novelty of being back, you know, to school even, and all those kind of seasonal bits has worn off a bit. But it was certainly an interesting period to see those trends kind of settle a little bit in the last while, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody want to jump in? Yeah.
I have a question for you, Craig. For makeup or cosmetics, how hard is it to get something recalled? Because I remember, I think it was last year, the year before, an influencer released a set of lipsticks, and it looked like they were contaminated. People found bits of fluff and little bits in it, and the influencer didn't recall them at all, and they were on sale for ages, and people were testing them, buying them just to put them under microscopes, and it became a whole science. But I was surprised by, like, no one stepped in to take them back.
Yeah, it is. It's cosmetics and the regulation of cosmetics has come a long way in a short time, but there's still a lot of things to do. So one of the big issues still is what we would call a deharmonized system, which means that a lot of countries are still kind of operating on their own. And even if you got something recalled in one country, maybe the country where the influencer lived, they might recall it there, but there's no kind of follow-up then to say, well, you need to recall it from everywhere. Whereas with medicines, there's more, if you like, joined up thinking. So if the FDA do something, the EMA will respond, and they'll likely do something similar, and you'll get a global recall. But for cosmetics, it's much more fragmented. And if you've got a small country where there's a problem identified, it doesn't necessarily mean that every country is going to react in the same way. And that's where, I suppose, consumer awareness is really important. And that's where the getting information out there. So the branding is, and the being aware of what to look for, and the sort of labels you can trust. And brand recognition is really important as well, because brands that have been around for a long time have survived because they're good at what they do, and they've perfected the art to a degree. So a little bit like other products, if there's something brand new comes out and you don't necessarily recognize the brand, you have to have a high degree of suspicion. If you had somebody brought out a new phone, you'd never heard of the brand before, you're not going to rush out and buy it, because you want to see a little bit of trust in the brand first. So there are lots of problems there.
Can I just ask, now that we're not testing on animals now, how do we test cosmetics?
So at a chemical level, and anyone that works in the cosmetic sector might think I'm kind of slagging off a little bit here, but I'm not. Cosmetics, from sort of a formulation perspective, they're kind of straightforward. There's a lot of water in there. There's a lot of things that emulsify, so that, there's a little bit of oil in there as well, because your skin is, our bodies are a lot of water with a little bit of oil, so it needs to be compatible. You'll have things to make them a little bit thicker so they don't slide off and fall on the ground, give it a bit of consistency. So from a chemical point of view, there are a lot of shared properties, and a lot of a lot of cosmetics at a really basic level. There's a lot of similarity. If you get one type of product from one company, you go next door, there will be some ingredients will vary, but the basic ingredients will stay the same. And that's in a way why cosmetics was low-hanging fruit for the animal testing thing, because you could say, we can be smarter about this. We don't have to test everything. So if it is something that's been around and there's what we call a safe history of use, you don't need to go testing that again. If it's been used for 100 years in human beings and there's no toxicities or no safety issues, then why go and test it again? So the focus will always be then on new ingredients. So if there's a new ingredient put in and it's never been tested before, then there will be tests done in vitro, which means we're using human cells, skin cells that are growing in Petri dishes, and we're looking to see, do we kill them or irritate them? You can look at white blood cells and see, do you get an inflammatory response? Is it going to be allergic? So you can do testing there. And then another important part of it is, we've a good understanding of chemistry at this stage, where we can look at the structure of a molecule, and then we can compare it and find molecules that look very similar. And for a good chance, you're going to find chemicals that are very similar that maybe were tested in the 60s or the 70s in animals. And then we leverage that data. So we say, look, this is really similar to that. We'll test them not in animals to show how similar they are. And then we'll rely on that information and we'll bridge across. So you're kind of looking for the gaps in the knowledge and just doing the bare minimum then to fill that in. So you can build up you can be very strategic, and you can avoid using animal testing.
Do we ever, say, pay humans to do it?
Yeah, and you will, and this is, again, it's something that companies have to be quite careful with, because there are very strict guidelines around what they can say in their claims. So they can't, and the temptation maybe sometimes is to veer into medical claims or claims that would look like a medical claim. So in Ireland, you have the HPRA, the Health Products Regulatory Authority. So they regulate both medicines and cosmetics on the Irish market. And if they see an advertisement, for example, that has something that looks like a cosmetic claiming to be a medicine, that's not good, and they'll contact the company and say you need to change that or withdraw that. So you know, what you're looking at then is field trials or market trials, where a company might put out an ad and say we're looking for 10 people to test this product. It'll be on a voluntary basis. Sometimes it'll be monetized, but it might be just you get free product for 6 months or something like that. So it'll be incentivized in some way. And then those studies, and you'll see these on ads, you know, 90 out of 100 people who use this product said this, but the wording of that is always going to be very careful. So you will certainly have human testing, but all of the toxicity testing and the toxicity assessment will have been done before that. The other question I was going to ask you was about, so I have 3 little ladies at home and 1 little man, and we're just coming into the phase of life where social media is going to become prevalent, and it's going to be, you know, looking for small devices and mobile phones and things like that. So I have a really uneasy feeling myself about it. Am I right to be uneasy?
I don't want to make you uneasy, but certainly, what social media is not all bad. Okay, there's a lot of negative, you know, narration about it or discourse about it, and social media can keep you connected with people. It can be a source of entertainment. It can connect you with people in your same situation if you had like a disability or a condition or whatever. So there can be loads of advantages. But I suppose as human beings, we all engage in a process called social comparison. We compare ourselves to others. And that's not all bad either, because that's how we learn about ourselves and about how we learn about kids too. So that's why we have developmental milestones. You compare this 2-year-old to all the others and we see how they're getting on. So comparison is not necessarily bad. But I think an issue with social media is you have so many more people to compare yourself to. So when you're just engaging in comparison in your daily life with your family and your classmates, fine. But social media offers you everybody in the world. So many more comparisons, and they're not actually accurate ones either, because they've been filtered and they're only the best side of a person. So that's what I worry about sometimes, that people are not judicious in their use of social media. And I know one study we ran, not about social media, but where people discussed it. University students described it as, you see a different person going out every night of the week, and you know it's a different person, but you still feel like you're the only one not going out. So it might be a different person every night they're seeing, but the feeling they get is, everyone's out except me. So even when we are aware that we're doing all this comparison, we still can kind of get some negative feelings from it. So that's, I suppose, what I'd be concerned about, that people would not really fully appreciate how made up somebody could be, how many filters he used, and that they might be engaging in comparison too much from it. Yeah, so yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a difficult one to navigate. And I think another issue is social media changes so rapidly. By the time you have a handle on it, there's a new thing, right? So even the research on it is all like Facebook, and you know, Facebook, forget about Facebook, you know, it's TikTok now. By the time the research is out on TikTok, who knows what it will be. So it's really hard to keep up.
Yeah, and even, what was the one you dropped in earlier on, my new word for today,
A glow down.
A glow down.
Yeah.
I think as well that even the vocabulary is changing so quickly.
The vocabulary, I can't keep up myself. Like even though the students are great to try and keep me informed, I still can't keep up. And even, it's funny, sometimes people of college going age will say, oh, I just, you know, my younger sister is just so into her social media, and I'm just looking at them thinking, what? To me, you're so close in your interests, but to you, they use it in a totally different way. So even in that category of younger people, or we could say from 12 to 25, even say, there's so much variety in how people use social media, and the trends are quite difficult to keep up with. And some trends can be positive, like the positive elements of body positivity, for example, or maybe even information like you mentioned about the influencer being shared, that would be positive. But I just think it can be used in so many ways, and we're not always careful about how we use it, is probably the main issue, and all that kind of comparison that can happen.
Yeah, so it still goes down to good old-fashioned being a parent and
Sadly,
trying
and
to-
holding off on the smartphone as long as possible,
Yeah.
no matter what everyone else has. Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in with a question? Down the back. There's one down the back.
Is there a trend or trends in the packaging of cosmetics? In other words, do people purchase cosmetics because of what they see in the packaging or the way the packaging looks as opposed to what's in it?
I think that probably depends on the kind, and you'll probably have thoughts as well, Craig, on the kind of cosmetic, because it's such a broad term. Like sunscreen, you said, is a cosmetic. So people might buy sunscreen because of the packaging. I know I would be like water resistant, 50 plus, childproof, okay? But when it comes to things like makeup, I don't think packaging, the influencer culture and celebrities aligning themselves with cosmetic brands, and that's seems to be much more powerful, and that's why so many of the big brands, even the Estee Lauder that you mentioned, they really invest a lot in influencers. So it must pay off if they're investing that much. So instead, what seems to drive people is people engaging with influencers who present kind of an authentic feeling narrative about their use of a product. And that's really interesting because we didn't have that years ago. We just had print media, we just had TV. We couldn't really engage with the people in the ads, but now we feel we can. And sometimes we actually can. So the influencer culture seems quite powerful in shaping and celebrity endorsement people's choices. And then people might buy into a particular brand. So I don't think packaging is quite as relevant, but for less, for cosmetics less focused on beauty, it might be. So sunscreen might be an example where that can be more important.
Yeah, I mean, from a boring legal point of view, a regulatory point of view, real estate's at a premium. There's an awful lot of information that has to be on the package. So they have to be very strategic. And a lot of the packages are small. You know, if you think of a lip gloss, all of the information that has to be on that. So if you actually think about it, it's usually, you know, you walk into an outlet or a pharmacy or a store, it's the big stand, the display stand has the picture and it has the image that they want you to associate. When you actually get the packet then, it's pretty boring. It's usually a box with lots of text on it and maybe some gold writing or something like that. So yeah, it varies.
Sorry, can I just comment? There's a brilliant book called Brandsplaining, which is all about the marketing of cosmetics to women and how it has been over the years that really tackles this. And it's funny because they have a generic moisturizer on the front cover. I knew exactly which one it was. And just by the colour.
Colour, the shape of the bottle. And
Yeah.
it's amazing the amount of analysis goes into the, you know, every little aspect of it and really inventive ways of getting your brand recognition in there.
And once you know it, they probably don't want to change because you knew that bottle. They'll never change that bottle if that's how, you know, strong it is. Yeah. Interesting.
Did you have a question?
That's more like how do you, sort of as a regular person, navigate it? Like, you know, when you buy something and there is the accordion of information, it's like one of the product ranges where there's all the science, but like the marketing, it's just like even the use of the word natural. It's like, buy this, it's natural. You know, you kind of know that it's kind of nonsense, but like how do you, just as a regular consumer, navigate the labels and the information? So like the big one at the moment is like you go in now and there's like a wall of retinoids retinols, and you're kind of like, well, what does that do for me?
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's somebody coming at you and they're like, oh, you need retinols. And like, I didn't know I needed them last week, but sure, I need them. You know, so how do you understand the labels and like the claims that are being made and kind of establish, well, that's actually grand and that's marketing?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly, I'd always really encourage a critical disposition. So kind of, if it's something new and you haven't experienced it and there's a hard sell going on, you should have a high degree of suspicion and not just, you know, take the information as it's presented without challenging it or asking those questions. You know, do I need this or what's the benefit? And again, if there is a specific claim being made around a new ingredient, whether it's, let's say, collagen fragments or whatever it is, they can't. So somewhere on the display in the pharmacy, there should be information where you find the study to back up that claim. So if you really want to drill down, you can go off and find that And you can see, well, how many people did they look at? What sort of things did they measure? And does the claim actually match up with the evidence that they've shown? So it is, and you know, a big part of Science Week is always, I suppose, trying to encourage people to engage their critical decision making in life, and with cosmetics, it is really important.
Can I ask, can you trust the regulations and the testing and everything that goes behind it? I go down a rabbit hole of, oh, this ingredient is cancerous, and then I realise that that's in my powder foundation that I use every day, and then, you know, I don't use that for a week, but eventually I want to go back to my powder foundation.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of uncertainty that a lot of people will have, and in a way it's what some people will take advantage of. So, you know, I would never say trust anything blindly. If you have doubts about something, you want to have your doubts satisfied, go and look for the information and scrutinise it. But what we would say is, the reason regulations exist and the reason regulatory bodies and products like this are regulated is for the protection of the public. That's why they exist. Is it perfect? No, and new information comes along all of the time. But again, you just have to be a discerning shopper and a discerning person in what information you're going to trust. You can always go down these rabbit holes, and there will always be the next thing which will be highlighted as, oh, this is a really toxic chemical, or this is a really dangerous substance, and it's here, there, and everywhere. If they're in products like cosmetics, if they are in there, there will be levels. So for, you know, toxicology, it's not just a binary. It's not, is it there or is it not? It's how much is there is really important. And the whole science of toxicology is about determining safe limits for things. Because, as I said some way through, everything can kill you. So if you kind of take that approach, then you'd live in a little bubble inside your bedroom and you'd never leave. So it's always about the amount, but also then it has to get inside your body to do harm as well. And again, one of the definitions for a cosmetic is that it shouldn't get into your body, because you're putting it on the outside and it shouldn't get in meaningful quantities. So again, it's a Lego house. If you get the foundations right, then you can build trust as you go along, because you're saying, okay, well, there's a little bit of that in there, but it's below the level we know is dangerous, and it's also going on the outside, so it can't get to my heart, or it can't get to my liver, or whatever, where it could possibly do damage.
And I'm interested in absorption. When you're saying it's outside your body, do they not consider the fact that your skin would absorb?
Some things will be absorbed, but your skin is really robust, you know, so you can design and engineer solutions, mixtures, so that things can get in, and equally you can make sure the chemistry is right so things don't get in. And for cosmetics, you're basically trying to limit the absorption of things. So you don't want it getting into the bloodstream. It might get in through the layers of the skin, and if it goes beyond that, that's a problem, because now it's not a cosmetic, it's something that's getting into the system and maybe modifying things inside the body, which is not what a cosmetic is.
What about the ingredients and the retinoids? Is it proven to? Because in pregnancy, like, it's proven to pass through the placenta.
Yeah, it is, but again, it's how it's absorbed into the body. So if you're putting it on the skin, you know, meaningful quantities aren't going to get into the bloodstream to get across the placenta. Now, if you're ingesting it, that's a whole other story. So if you have it, you know, in diet, or it's present in other medications that you're taking, and you're taking too much of it and you get pregnant, that's a big issue, because it is teratogenic. But, you know, it has to get into the bloodstream first to get across the placenta. And if you're rubbing it in the skin, you're using it. Now, and again, as part of the safety assessment, you kind of have to, in a way, plan for all eventualities. So an important part of it is within the scope of reasonably predicted use. So you can have something like that in an ointment or in a cream, and you could say, well, what if somebody drinks that tube? That's kind of not reasonable. You know, that's outside the scope of reasonable use. So it won't be a deal breaker.
It's just every brand of retinoid says that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, that's a warning, because it's known that if it does get into the bloodstream in significant quantities, it could have that effect. But if it's on the outside and it's being used topically and it's used in the right formulation, then it shouldn't be getting, you know, into the bloodstream.
You mentioned the water and the ingredients that go into them.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of water use there, but also in their basic manufacturing processes there.
Yeah.
the combustion of these materials, what does the future of cosmetics look like as we kind of move towards a more sustainable society and recognizing the damage that these things do?
So there's a big overlap. So a big thing now in pharmaceuticals is the whole idea of green chemistry. So moving to use catalysts and procedures basically which have a lower environmental impact, making sure that the waste is being handled in the right way, making sure you're not putting things out into fresh water and you're filtering. So a lot of the cosmetic manufacturing sites would be just like a pharmaceutical manufacturing site. They'd be monitoring the wastewater going out. They would have filtration, on-site filtration. And again, there are EU regulations which dictate what the acceptable levels of different things going out are. But it does crop up every so often. So you might remember a few years ago, there was this thing with beads, microparticles, microplastics, and you could get these face washes which had these abrasive beads. You can't get them anymore because we discovered that these things were going out into the environment and they were accumulating and they weren't going away. And then we've started finding them in fish, and when they're in fish, they end up in your tummy and all of that sort of stuff. So every so often you'll have things like that where it's, but there was if you think about historically how long it takes us sometimes to recognize a problem, that was pretty quick in human history. They kind of appeared and a year or two later they were gone because there was monitoring going on and they were able to say, well, these microparticles are actually a really bad idea. So it's about surveillance, and like I said, there's a lot of compatibility and crossover with the pharmaceutical industry. So a lot of things that are happening there will happen because it's the same manufacturers as well and the same approaches. So yeah, there's a lot of changes there. But even in terms of branding, the big thing at the moment is the idea of clean beauty, which is, again, it's just branding.
It is just branding, but any of these clean or green, I mean, you're still buying something new to add to the circulation is how I look at it. So any item that you buy is still environmentally unfriendly because it's an extra thing you don't need. So I find the clean and the green very funny, or the sustainable. This is my sustainable clothing company. Are they secondhand clothes? If not, how is it sustainable? Because people are buying new clothes. And you see that pop up a lot more now. It's a sustainable fashion, but any new fashion, to my mind, can't be. So I assume it's kind of similar with cosmetics. That might be essential.
You're getting the unfiltered honesty now because recording. So I always equate green and sustainable with we're paying somebody somewhere in the world to plant a few trees. And 90% of the time that's actually what's happening. And it's been shown that it's a real fallacy. Basically, a company in America will decide we want to be able to label ourselves as sustainable, and they go to the website where they find this company who's registered as a sustainability company, and they say for every dollar you give us, we're going to plant so many thousand trees or so many trees, and they give them 10 million or whatever. They go off and they say we've planted how many. What's come out in the wash in the last year or two is there was regulatory investigations looking at these companies, and they're basically double jobbing. So they're taking 10 million off company A and B, they're planting the same amount of trees, and they're telling both companies, so they're presenting that they're doing an awful lot more than they are.
Yeah, because you think the word sustainable, what does that actually mean? For how can a sustainable company surely is one that can sustain itself, doesn't actually have a meaning for us as consumers that makes sense.
Yeah, so these companies are basically set up and they will issue certificates of that you are, sustainable entity because you're basically offsetting your carbon footprint in this way.
By buying a new product.
The same as with the COP27, like that's what's coming over the next 5 years, is that Ireland are going to start paying some third world country to buy their carbon credits just so that we don't fall foul of the EU expectations. So yeah, there's a lot of, again, it's branding. It's using this word to present one thing, but in reality
it's
there's
a
something
nice
else
cozy
happening.
word, things being sustainable, isn't it? Or clean or green or natural, like you say, whereas chemicals bad.
Yeah, it is. Word association games.
Yeah, we need new words. We'll invent some new ones later. You ready
we
to
have
say?
good words. Liar, that's a good word. Fraud.
Yes.
We're perfectly fit for words.
Yes.
We just need to use them more often.
Use them correctly, yes.
Brilliant. So look, I think unless anyone else has a burning question, we'll wrap it up.
You can end on the note that anything can kill you.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to end on?
Even water. You did mention water earlier
depending
on
the dosage.
Yes, exactly. Anyone know how much water it takes to kill an adult?
8 liters?
Good guess, on the money, exactly.
How do you know that?
Some dose of toxicology.
Oh, 8 litres.
8 litres for an adult male, yeah.
Okay.
So you're basically drinking water so quickly that you're diluting all of the things in your bloodstream.
Okay.
And the potassium and the sodium and all that stuff that your neurons need to keep working reaches a point where there's not enough there. So it used to be really common in long distance running, so marathons and things like that. So it used to be standard organization procedure. If you were organizing a marathon, you had to have 40 to 50 ambulances waiting because you knew people were going to start dropping like flies because they were running and sweating out, and they were losing salts and water, and then they were rehydrating with pure water. So they were ending up with water poisoning. And that gave birth to the isotonic water or sports drink industry. And the ambulances disappeared.
Excellent. But that's kind of good. It sounded like it was going to be bad
No,
isotonic water, but then it was good. The ambulances left.
The ambulances are gone now.
I found that isotonic drinks affect.
Oh, there's all sorts of other issues, yeah. Like you can, well, it's like everything. Too much of anything is bad for you. So they're in. The Oralite, well,
Is it?
It's on prescription.
it's on, yeah, because you can, people tend to use it, even things like caffeine tablets. You get people who get big into bodybuilding and they'll start using Diorolite and basically to try and keep things going for longer and stuff like that. And like that, too much of anything is bad for you. So you can get caffeine poisoning, you can get water
I was
poisoning.
only joking
you can
about
get
that being your
everything.
last point.
Yeah.
Now.
No, that's my favourite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
All the ordinary average things that can kill you. So folks, big thank you to Anne-Marie for coming up from Limerick and
It's lovely
sharing
to be in the Midlands
perspectives
again.
Yeah. Anne-Marie was up before COVID
A long time ago.
2016.
16.
So delighted to have you back again. I want to say a big thank you to, where is Aoife? Aoife down the back, working with Midlands Science, and Creaven and Jackie and Pauline, who is not here tonight, but was just as involved in organising the events and, of course, all the Science Week events. And thank you for coming along.
Thank you, Craig, as well. Cheers.